Hi, I have a message that I wanted to share today, and it's really for those of you who, for the last 2 years, have been aware of the struggle that you've been in to find your path forward in life. Now, for some, it's not a struggle. For some, it's as easy as one, two, three. It just all starts well, moves well, flows well, and goes well. That is not the case for a lot of people. So if you have been struggling to find your way, I want to share a little bit about what that looks like, because the first part of your struggle is feeling it. The second part is being aware of it and asking questions. And usually most people start and stay with, why me? When I was 5 years old, I nearly drowned. And to this day, that has been one of the most terrifying experiences that I've been through. The setup was very clear in hindsight. At the time, I was only 5, and I didn't realize that I had been set up for that particular situation. What was the setup? A pool party. Adults bringing their children together on a beautiful estate with an in-ground swimming pool, lots of room to play, lots of space to run around. Lawyers, doctors, artists, musicians in what in those days was called the Black bourgeoisie. These were people of color who had, with their genetics, managed to dodge some of the deeply, deeply destructive bullets that are racial prejudice. It's a beautiful day. I don't know how to swim. Neither of my parents can swim. My sister can't swim. And yet, despite this, I'm in a pool all by myself with lots of other kids who were doing, many of them were great swimmers, playing games, having a lot of fun. I'm just in the water, not at all prepared or spoken to by either my mother or father about stay over here, don't go over there. None of that happened. So I, in the shallow end of the pool, got myself into a very big inner tube in which I could float and kick my legs and paddle around and just find my way through the various things that kids were playing in the pool. I wasn't up to doing any of that because I could swim. Well, I didn't know the difference between the shallow end of the pool and the deep end of the pool because neither of my parents had explained that to me. Well, I eventually paddled over to the deep end of the pool, and my dear cousin, who I am very fond of, great swimmer, he didn't know I couldn't swim. He probably couldn't have imagined such a thing. He was playing a very boisterous game with other boys in the pool who were good swimmers. And they decided that they needed the inner tube in which I was floating around in for their next implement for the game they were playing. So my cousin just came over and snatched it from around me, not at all concerned about what would happen to me because he was a month younger than me. He didn't know I couldn't swim. But I'm in 6 feet of water now. And I was scrawny, skinny little kid. So I didn't float, I sank. And I had no idea, zero understanding of what was happening to me. I started quite naturally to use my voice to scream for help. Seemed for a 5-year-old like a natural response. And I watched huge bubbles of air floating up to the surface, but there was no sound. I couldn't hear the sound of my own voice, just sort of garbled noise. And then I realized that that was not helping me, and I just began to thrash. And I thrashed and thrashed and thrashed as hard as I could, completely disoriented under the water. I couldn't see. I didn't have the understanding because I didn't learn it from either parent or learning how to swim, that the bubbles go up to the surface of the water. If I'd had that orientation, I might have pushed up and tried to follow the bubbles, but I didn't have this orientation. Terrified, utterly terrified, because now I couldn't breathe. But I realized I couldn't breathe. And so I stopped screaming and I sort of, I think, took a breath or whatever was left in my lungs. I just shut off as much as I could the water coming in, and I thrashed. Now, maybe I had 30 seconds left of thrashing to do, but I used those 30 seconds to thrash. And my sister, who was 5 years older, was in the shallow end of the pool playing games with other friends. And she saw me under the water. And she had the presence of mind to know that I didn't belong under the water because she knew I couldn't swim. She couldn't swim either. What was I doing there? She reached down. I had a very long braid then, like I do now. And she grabbed my braid and pulled my head up out of the water. I am grateful to her for saving my life. But what came next was as disturbing in other ways as nearly drowning and screaming for help and no one being aware of me. When she pulled my head up out of the water, my body reoriented to vertical, basic physics, and I was standing in water that wasn't up to my knees, and I was 5, so figure that might have been 1.5 foot of water at most. And I was crying and I was upset. I was literally hysterical. And the other kids in the pool were laughing at me and they thought that I was just really, really stupid. My sister didn't comfort me. She just pulled my head out of the water and then went around and resumed what she was doing. So quite literally, not out of my body, but really freaked out. I walked over to the shallow end of the pool where the steps were. I was familiar with those because that's how I'd gotten in and out of the pool. And I sat down and I was crying and sputtering. And I looked over at my mother, who was stretched out on a chaise lounge on the pool deck. She was reading a magazine, smoking a cigarette, enjoying a drink. And I looked at her. She very casually put the drink down, put the cigarette in the ashtray, put the magazine down on the open space where she'd been reading on the chaise lounge. And she came over and got into the pool. She couldn't swim. She didn't particularly like doing that. Great figure. She was a runway model. And she sat down next to me. There. Don't make a fuss. Nobody drowns in the shallow end of the pool. She never asked, what happened? Are you okay? She never hugged me. She never sat me on her lap and rocked me in some form of comfort. She patted me, made that statement, got up, left the pool, left me in the pool, walked back to her cigarette, drank, magazine, stretched back out, and went back to reading. As I was sitting there on the steps, I made a very, very life-changing decision. What I understood in that event was nobody saw me, nobody heard me, nobody missed me. No one was looking out for me. And while I didn't die physically, a huge part of me died emotionally. And that was the part of me that had any sense of trust in my primary family. And my primary family was my world. So by extension, I lost trust in the rest of the world in that moment. And in that moment, I chose to, from that moment forward, put myself first, because it was clear that nobody else was going to do that for me.